Learn English through stories.
Letters from a Cat by Helen Hunt Jackson. 5. My dear Helen, I am sure you must have wondered why I have not written to you for the last 2 weeks, but when you hear what I have been through, you will only wonder that I am alive to write to you at all. I was very glad to hear your mother say, yesterday, that she had not written to you about what had happened to me, because it would make you so unhappy. But now that it is all over, and I am in a fair way to be soon as well as ever, I think you will like to hear the whole story. In my last letter I told you about the new black cat, Caesar, who had come to live in the Nelson house, and how anxious I was to know him. As soon as my nose was fit to be seen, Judge Dickinson's cat, who is a good, hospitable old soul, in spite of her stupidity, invited me to tea, and asked him too. All the other cats were asked to come later in the evening, and we had a grand frolic, hunting rats in the judge's great barn. Caesar is certainly the handsomest and most gentlemanly cat I ever saw. He paid me great attention, in fact, so much, that one of those miserable half-starved cats from Mill Valley grew so jealous that she flew at me and bit my ear till it bled, which broke up the party. But Caesar went home with me, so I did not care. Then we sat and talked a long time under the nursery window. I was so much occupied in what he was saying, that I did not hear Mary open the window overhead, and was therefore terribly frightened when there suddenly came down on us a whole pailful of water. I was so startled that I lost all presence of mind. And without bidding him good night, I jumped directly into the cellar window by which we were sitting. Oh, my dear Helen, I can never give you any idea of what followed. Instead of coming down as I expected to on the cabbages, which were just under that window the last time I was in the cellar, I found myself sinking, into some horrible soft, slimy, sticky substance, which in an instant more would have closed over my head, and suffocated me. But, fortunately, as I sank, I felt something hard at one side, and making a great effort, I caught on it with my claws. It proved to be the side of a barrel, and I succeeded in getting one paw over the edge of it. There I hung, growing weaker and weaker every minute, with this frightful stuff running into my eyes and ears, and choking me with its bad smell. I mewed as loud as I could, which was not very loud, for whenever I opened my mouth the stuff trickled into it off my whiskers. But I called to Caesar, who stood in great distress at the window, and explained to him, as well as I could, what had happened to me, and begged him to call as loudly as possible, for if somebody did not come very soon, and take me out, I should certainly die. He insisted, at first, on jumping down to help me himself, but I told him that would be the most foolish thing he could do. If he did, we should certainly both be drowned. So he began to mew at the top of his voice, and between his mewing and mine, there was noise enough for a few minutes. Then windows began to open, and I heard your grandfather swearing and throwing out a stick of wood at Caesar. Fortunately he was so near the house that it did not hit him. At last your grandfather came downstairs, and opened the back door, and Caesar was so frightened that he ran away, for which I have never thought so well of him since, though we are still very good friends. When I heard him running off and calling back to me, from a distance, that he was so sorry he could not help me, my courage began to fail, and in a moment more, I should have let go of the edge of the barrel, and sunk to the bottom. But luckily your grandfather noticed that there was something very strange about my mewing, and opened the door at the head of the cellar stairs, saying, "I do believe the cat is in some trouble down here." Then I made a great effort and mewed still more piteously. How I wished I could call out and say, yes, indeed, I am drowning to death, in I'm sure I don't know what, but something a great deal worse than water. However, he understood me as it was, and came down with a lamp. As soon as he saw me, he set the lamp down on the cellar bottom, and laughed so that he could hardly move. I thought this was the most cruel thing I ever heard of. If I had not been, as it were, at death's door, I should have laughed at him, too, for even with my eyes full of that dreadful stuff, I could see that he looked very funny in his red nightcap, and without his teeth. He called out to Mary, and your mother, who stood at the head of the stairs, come down, here's the cat in the soft soap barrel, and then he laughed again, and they both came down the stairs laughing, even your dear kind mother, who I never could have believed would laugh at any one in such trouble. They did not seem to know what to do at first, nobody wanted to touch me, and I began to be afraid I should drown while they stood looking at me, for I knew much better than they could how weak I was from holding on to the edge of the barrel so long. At last your grandfather swore that oath of his, you know the one I mean, the one he always swears when he is very sorry for anybody, and lifted me out by the nape of my neck, holding me as far off from him as he could, for the soft soap ran off my legs and tail in streams. He carried me up into the kitchen, and put me down in the middle of the floor, and then they all stood round me, and laughed again, so loud that they waked up the cook, who came running out of her bedroom with her tin candlestick and a chair in her hand, thinking that robbers were breaking in. At last your dear mother said, poor pussy, it is too bad to laugh at you, when you are in such pain, I had been thinking so for some time. Mary, bring the small washtub. The only thing we can do is to wash her. When I heard this, I almost wished they had left me to drown in the soft soap, for if there is anything of which I have a mortal dread, it is water. However, I was too weak to resist, and they plunged me in all over, into the tub full of ice-cold water. And Mary began to rub me with her great rough hands, which, I assure you, are very different from yours and your mother's. Then they all laughed again to see the white lather it made. In 2 minutes the whole tub was as white as the water under the mill wheel that you and I have so often been together to see. You can imagine how my eyes smarted. I burnt my paws once in getting a piece of beefsteak out of the coals where it had fallen off the gridiron, but the pain of that was nothing to this. You will hardly believe me when I tell you that they had to empty the tub and fill it again 10 times before the soap was all washed out of my fur. By that time I was so cold and exhausted that I could not move, and they began to think I should die. But your mother rolled me up in one of your old flannel petticoats, and made a nice bed for me behind the stove. By this time even Mary began to seem sorry for me, though she was very cross at first, and hurt me much more than she need to in washing me. Now she said, you're nothing but a poor beast of a cat, to be sure, but it's meself that would be sorry to have the little mistress come back, and find ye kilt. So you see your love for me did me service, even when you were so far away. I doubt very much whether they would have ever taken the trouble to nurse me through this sickness, except for your sake. But I must leave the rest for my next letter. I am not strong enough yet to write more than 2 hours at a time. Your affectionate Pussy. Vocabulary words. Hospitable, friendly and welcoming to guests or strangers. Frolic, playful and lively action or activity. Jealous, feeling or showing envy of someone's achievements and advantages. Suffocate, to die or cause to die from lack of air or inability to breathe. Piteously, in a manner that evokes pity or compassion. Frightful, extremely distressing or shocking. Slimy, having a slippery, wet, and unpleasant texture. Faint, to lose consciousness for a short time, typically as a result of a temporary deficiency of oxygen in the brain. Paw, the foot of an animal, especially a quadruped, with claws or nails. Suffocated, feeling or being oppressed, confined, or overwhelmed. Nape, the back of a person's neck. Plunged, to thrust or throw forcefully into a substance or place. Lather, a frothy white mass of bubbles produced by soap, typically as a result of being agitated. Exhausted, drained of physical or mental resources, very tired. Flannel, a soft, light woolen fabric used for clothing or bedding. Cross, irritable or annoyed. Kilt, past tense of kill, here used informally to mean harm or hurt. Nurse, to care for and encourage the recovery or improvement of someone who is ill or injured. Affectionate, showing fondness or tenderness. Frolic, to play and move about cheerfully, excitedly, or energetically.